Well, hello and welcome. Welcome to Around the Town with Mark. I am Mark Whalen, your host, and we are always appreciative that you tune in and visit with us. Well, we have a very special guest today, someone that you'd be very familiar with. She is a familiar face here at SCTV as a host and producer. She is also an accomplished author, and today she's wearing her author hat, and we're going to talk about her beautiful new exciting book, The Terrorist, as well as other things. So let me introduce, obviously, Harriet Grayson.
Hello, Mark.
Hello,
nice
Harriet. I love it. So how does it feel to be on that side of the table?
Oh, it's always a little strange.
Isn't it, though?
Yes, but then I just have to take your clues and then fill in the blanks.
Okay, well, I'm just going to let you just run with the show.
Oh, okay. Very good.
Obviously, introduce, even though most people know you, just introduce yourself.
Right. So my name is Harriet Grayson, and I do have the Community Culture Showcase, which is a show I have here promoting the arts, and we do a lot of stuff about Groton and the surrounding communities. And we'll be having a number of visual artists in the next couple of weeks, and that'll be an opportunity to see that. And as always, here in the studio, we have an art show. We'll probably have one, we'll certainly have one either during the fall or early winter, and I want everybody to come by. And if you are an artist, a visual artist, whatever the medium is, you certainly should contact Mark or contact the studio so that we can show you what we have here, and we always have a wonderful art show. So in my other hat, when I'm not a producer and a host, I am an author. Under my real name, Harriet Grayson, I write a number of very boring but useful books on grants writing and events planning. But on my other hat, I am a mystery writer, and I write under the pen name of Anastasia Goodman. And I've picked Anastasia because my books have this Russian theme. My anti-hero, Sasha Perlov, is a Russian-born New York City police detective. And this is my third book. The first one was Loose Ends, which introduced the public to Sasha and his family and some of the Russian community. And one of the minor characters in Loose Ends is Russian President Putin. So if you want to know how Mr. Putin thinks, by all means pick up Loose Ends. And then I followed Loose Ends with Death and Diamonds. And again, these are mysteries. So there's always a dead body. There was a dead body that opened up Loose Ends, and there's a dead body in Death and Diamonds. A jeweler is murdered on the streets, and Sasha is on the case. The jeweler was a Russian, so that's why he's called into it. My latest is The Terrorist. And so Sasha is off finding out whether a woman they picked up in Long Island is actually a terrorist. And the interesting and fun part of the story is that Sasha, the year is 2004. We are all very, very frightened because of 9/11. So the CIA has these, what they call extraordinary rendition prisons in Eastern Europe, and some of them, one actually was in Egypt and one in Thailand, where they took and picked up prisoners or people they thought were terrorists and brought them to these places. And it's Sasha's job to interrogate this woman. Now, Sasha's backstory is that he is the son of a Soviet dissident who was, in fact, imprisoned and tortured. So they, in fact, pick on Sasha to do this dirty work because they know that he will not torture this woman. And so it's the story of these prisons. It's a story of actually these Eastern European countries that take in the CIA because they're actually financially not doing well, and this is an opportunity for them to make money. So always with my stories, it's history, mystery, and current events. So I kind of mix it all together, and I give you a kind of an interesting story. So in this one, I make up the fact that the prison is in Belarus, which was part of the Soviet Empire. And so Sasha knows this area, he can speak Russian, and he takes a side trip to see one of his elderly relatives who is still living in Belarus. So there's a little bit of everything for everybody in my books, and they're fun. They're not police procedurals. They're actually got a lot of nice backstory. My characters, I think, are interesting and multi-layered, and you'll have a hoot. And you can buy them on Amazon. You can go to my website, www.oceanbreezepress.net. And if you live in the Westerly area, the Savoy Bookstore in downtown Westerly also has copies of my books. So that's my story in terms of being an author.
Well, I've read your other books, and I'm a big fan, and I'm really, the message is, if you want a good read, these are really fun books.
That's
they're
wonderful.
Fast reads. Everybody always loves a dead body here and there too.
Of course.
So where do you get the inspiration, or where did you get the information originally, and where do the ideas of these books come into mind?
Oftentimes I will pick up a newspaper or hear a story and that'll give me some kind of inspiration for a story like this. So that there is no story that I know of where someone was actually picked up in Long Island and then interrogated in Europe. But there's the idea of the CIA having these prisons, and also the fact that Sasha's mother was a prisoner and was tortured. And so she is his moral compass. And so that backstory kind of feeds into this. I took as my inspiration, actually, for her moral compass from Senator McCain.
Oh, really?
Because when there was legislation to allow this to go on during President Bush's administration, he was one of the only people who was in political life to speak out against this, because he himself had been a prisoner and had been tortured.
And yes, indeed.
And so that kind of courage, when it was politically unpopular to be against doing anything possible that they could to prisoners, he said, no, this is not the American way. And that gave me a kind of inspiration for pushing. I'd already had his mother being someone who had been tortured, but I made her position ever more important. And the fact that they chose Sasha because of his mother, that Senator McCain, in fact, was my inspiration.
Oh, I had no idea. That's
and of course, the poor man is having such health problems, so we certainly wish him well, because in the current administration, he is probably the only leading light, so hats off to him.
Yeah, and he's certainly given all his life to his country.
Service, yes, to service to his country.
Yes,
so, and the other kind of underlying theme of all of these books is the fact of life as an immigrant. Because Sasha came to the United States, he was already a teenager, so he had already lived half his life in Russia, and then had lived half his life in the United States. And I think immigrants in general have an interesting perspective all the time.
Certainly.
All the time. And almost all of us were immigrants. And I chose Belarus for where this prison is, not because actually there was a prison there, was that my mother's family comes from there.
I was getting ready to ask you if there's any kind of a family history that comes into play here with your books.
You read my mind, yes, yes.
Yeah.
And so, in fact, that's how I chose Belarus, because I knew about it. My grandmother, my mother told me stories. We actually, even the other day, I was looking in China, and I actually have a piece of China that my grandmother brought from Europe.
Really?
A stamp with Poland on it, because those empires kept on changing. Poland, Russia, Belarus really doesn't exist except in the minds of the people who live there. I mean, these are shifting kinds of political realities. So that piece of China I actually gave to my youngest daughter. And I said, you don't need it, it's a platter, but I'm not giving you the whole set because I know you don't want it. Just take the platter and keep it as a family heirloom. And
know the history behind it and what it means to your family. I think that's wonderful.
So yes, exactly. So I take a little bit of that and mix it in. And the other thing that was an inspiration to me was in the 1970s and 80s, there was a big movement to bring mostly Soviet Jews who wanted to leave the country to come to the United States and Israel. And it was called the Refusnik movement because these people were refused, they couldn't get out. And President Reagan and Senator Jackson from Washington State, who's long deceased, they were the instrumental in getting legislation passed that allowed these Soviet dissidents and Soviet Jews to come to the United States. They weren't all Jews, there were some just people who were dissidents who were allowed to leave because of their efforts. And in my books, in the dining room of Sasha's mother's house, in fact, is a photograph of Ronald Reagan.
Really?
So that's her hero because he was instrumental in getting them out. And yet, at the same time, once the Soviet Union falls apart, these Russians go back to Europe, and they go back to where they came from. And so in the modern age, unless it's a war or something, modern immigrants go back and forth. They go back to see family that never emigrated, or they just go back to see places that were familiar to them. So in all my books, the characters go somewhere. So in Loose Ends, they go back to Stalingrad, because again, this is fiction. My character's grandfather was a hero of the Battle of Stalingrad.
Okay.
So, and there is commemoration every year in Russia. Stalingrad is no longer Stalingrad; they call it Volgograd. But they changed the name, but it's still the site of the battle, a monumental battle, and so they commemorate that every year.
There really is a tremendous amount of history over there. I know I had a great uncle who was a Russian Jew, and he was in a prisoner of war camp during the Second World War early on. And when they used to visit Connecticut on weekends, the stories he would tell. I was just a kid at the time, and I wish I had absorbed more. But he would tell all kinds of stories of life in the prisoner of war camps and things like that, and it was fascinating.
And horrible.
And horrible.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Both
One
of
story
those
I remember him, because they weren't fed very well, and there was an officer that ate an apple, and he threw the apple core down on the ground, and of course everyone just jumped on it to try to get just a seed even of this apple core, and it's very moving when you think that.
Oh, absolutely,
absolutely. Of what people went through.
In Loose Ends, I think more than the other books, there are some pieces about the Battle of Stalingrad that I integrate into the novel, and I do that by having survivors talk about their experiences. And then there are some horrible facts about what happened. So the Nazis, as they're developing the gas that they use in the concentration camps, their first experiments are in Russian POWs.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And they would actually have mobile vans, and they would put the gas in until they could calibrate it, and that developed into what they use in concentration camps. And Russian people know that. And so when after Stalingrad, the Russians then move west, and they simply just kill all the Germans they could find. I mean, because they had 20 million Russians died during the war, and that's an awful lot of people. And something like 90,000 Nazi troops survived the Battle of Stalingrad. By the end of the war, there were only 5,000 left. So they basically starved them to death. Because that's exactly what they had gone through. The Battle of Leningrad lasted 2 years. 1 million people starved to death. 1 million Russians starved to death. So they have a long memory about these kinds of things. So I integrate that in. And the other thing is, during the 70s and 80s, when these Russians were coming to the United States, I worked with some of them as a volunteer, trying to help them assimilate into America. They came, of course, they came to Brooklyn. Brighton Beach became a little Russian haven.
That's where my great uncle went to Brooklyn.
Oh, okay. But there were a bunch of people who came to Hartford, and I was living outside of Hartford. So I listened to the stories. So now I'm an adult, not a child. I'm an adult, and I'm listening to these stories, and they're fascinating stories. Some of them about people who have survived the war, and others just about being an immigrant. This is a gorgeous, wonderful country. But it is very strange, even for people who seem similar to us. It's still very different being an immigrant, and they, of course, have an accent, so people can pick them up immediately in terms of the accent. So you know that they're foreigners. And we go through waves of anti-immigrant feeling. I mean, it happened in the 19th century when there were so many that came in, happened in the beginning of the 20th century. So it's not strange that we have this reaction to immigrants right now. And it's usually when things seem tight, especially economics, when people are feeling insecure perhaps in their work or their lifestyle or just the money that they have or could be having. We have to find a scapegoat. I mean, it's human nature.
So it's sounding to me that your books are also, in some ways, a history lesson, do you think?
Yes, I think.
Because there's, even though they're fiction, what the energy that you're getting that goes into these books come out of real events that you've learned of in
Yes.
the world.
Oh, yeah. Definitely. Definitely.
So
There
by
is
that-
there is
yeah.
a realism about these novels.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
so that's why, in some reasons, to me, by reading the book, if you look at it that way, it's a little bit of a history lesson.
Yes, you're perfectly right.
Yeah.
You're perfectly right. And so it just was released, The Terrorist.
Okay.
And I have I organize what we call literary salons. And they are something I came up with the beginning of this year, actually last year and then into this year. And I've been doing it all year. I'm going to do it till the end of the year. And that is I get the opportunity for local authors and poets to read and discuss their work. And if they have something that's published, to sell it.
Okay.
And I've created them, and I have 3 of them every month.
Oh, all right.
And I have, because I found these wonderful venues, and the people who own these venues have been very, very kind to me. So I have the Malted Barley,
Okay.
which is in downtown Westerly at 42 High Street.
Okay.
And they are the 4th Tuesday of every month. They host what I call Literary Salon, Books and Brews.
Write this down, everybody, because
Books and Brews, and
okay.
and it's the 4th Tuesday this month. It'll be July 28th. August 28th, and I'll be talking about my book, but there'll be 3 other authors who will be
okay.
talking about their book. One is a young adult author. One will be talking about this an interesting piece out of the slavery Civil War era.
Oh, really? Okay.
And then, just the other one is just a nonfiction writer talking about the surviving divorce.
Oh,
So that's a kind of how-to kind of book. So I have variety there.
you certainly do.
Yes, yes, and it's upstairs. And Colin Bennett, who is the owner of the Malted Barley, has been very kind to me. I mean, we have this gorgeous private room upstairs for people to read and to have a pretzel and have a beer and just chit-chat about the books, read a little bit if they want from the book. So that is absolutely fabulous.
And these are free?
Absolutely free.
They're open to everybody?
Open to anyone and everyone. And we
Okay,
want people
wonderful.
to come because the authors need it. It's always
Sure.
very good for people to hear and see people's reaction to their work.
Yeah, of
And the
course.
best way to do is to read something from one of their novels or nonfiction or whatever.
Yep.
And that they can get some immediate feedback. And then I'm working with the Tapped Apple, which makes cider and apple wine right in downtown Westerly, literally across the street from the Malted Barley.
Oh, great.
So it's the Tapped Apple at 37 High Street.
And Westerly is such a wonderful
Oh,
place.
absolutely.
Anyway.
It's just bubbling.
Just a
bubbling.
wonderful place to go. Yeah.
It's got restaurants and bars, and
Yeah.
they even have a cigar bar, and you name it, they're down
it's
there.
just quintessential Rhode Island.
New
It's
England.
New
Oh, yeah,
England.
it's very good.
Just,
The
and
train station is there. I mean, they have a beautiful library.
it's easy to get to, easy to park, and you can just really have an
Absolutely.
evening. Yeah.
So the Tapped Apple hosts poetry on and other kinds of mixed stuff on the first Wednesday, so September 5th. September 5th, we're going to have this tremendous reading. A guy named Charlie Kellogg, who is not a writer,
Okay.
but he's actually a Toastmaster with me.
Oh,
we
all right.
belong to Toastmaster together. He wrote this story about his internalizing what happened on 9/11.
Oh.
And it's called Falling Man.
Ooh.
So
Ooh, that's a powerful.
it is so powerful.
That's
And I lived
powerful.
through that. I saw.
Yeah.
I was there in Manhattan. My husband actually saw one of the buildings fall down.
Really.
You must come, and you will not have any greater appreciation for the tragedy that belongs to us as Americans.
the title alone is
Oh,
moving.
you must come.
Absolutely.
September 5th, 7 o'clock at night at the Tapped Apple. Come and hear Charlie read this. It's very short. It's only 7 minutes.
Yeah.
A short story, but it will thrill you. And then I'm having a couple of other poets who will be there reading. But the highlight will be Charlie's Falling
that
Man.
sounds
And tell everybody to come. It's just fantastic.
Wow.
Have a little apple wine. You need to eat before or after because Tapped Apple really doesn't have any food.
Okay.
Truffles and then a non-alcohol, so you can have a soda, a coffee.
Sure.
But what they're famous for is fabulous cider.
Ciders.
Oh, delicious
Okay.
cider. And then apple wine, which is kind
It's
of
a great
interesting.
time of year, September.
Oh,
You're starting to think of those types of things.
Absolutely,
So it's
absolutely.
perfect.
It's
yeah.
perfect. So September 5th, definitely you want to hear Charlie at the Tapped Apple. On August 28th, you want to hear me at and some other writers at the Malted Barley. And so the fourth Tuesday is always the Malted Barley. The first and third Wednesday is the Tapped Apple.
Okay.
Tapped Apple. In September, there will be no third Wednesday. There's a Jewish holiday right there, so we're going to skip that one. So September 5th to hear Charlie talk about Falling Man, and August 28th to hear about the terrorist, and a little bit of Russian history and the story of immigrants in America. I think that's kind of interesting. And then there's a platform for other people to go ahead and talk about their books, talk about who they are. It's always important with authors to be able to tell you, just as you've been questioning me about how this stuff inspired you, what gave you the impetus, the catalyst to start.
Right.
I had been writing for years nonfiction. I wrote a business column, I wrote a women's column in the Hartford area. I was syndicated, I did a lot of nonfiction writing, but I always wanted to be a fiction writer. And the catalyst for me to write Loose Ends was, and I describe in the book, this park where there used to be free rock and roll concerts, and twice during the summer there would be Russian language concerts, so they had Russian singers and performers.
Oh, great.
Because Brighton Beach the park is in Brighton Beach, so of course you have this huge Russian community.
Oh, sure.
And there was a man who used to stand online to go to these concerts, and they're free, right? So you have to get there early to stand in line.
Right.
And he became, I don't know why, sometimes a writer gets sort of fixated, and he became the dead man in my book.
Oh, did he really?
Yes. He did. He did. So and he didn't die, but he did have a Russian girlfriend.
Does he know this?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
So he became my inspiration, and I made him the dead man.
Oh, all right. All right.
It's not a very flattering picture, but that's the way he always seemed to me.
Okay. Okay.
So little, that's the quirky stuff about difference between writing fiction and writing nonfiction. My nonfiction books I heavily research. I mean, I'm trying to give everybody all this information, and so then they can go and run with it. A novel, we just want you to think, to enjoy, give you a taste of maybe some other world, and that's what a good, interesting novel I think presents to the reader.
It's a good, interesting novel is when you forget about everything else around you, and you're just in that moment of what you're reading, and you just forget everything else. So it's very good therapy to get immersed in a good book.
And my character's name is Sasha Perlov. It's always on the covers of the books. And Sasha, in America, happens to be a girl's name. The President Obama has a daughter named Sasha. But
That's right. Yeah.
But it's not a Russia. It's a man's name.
It's a man's name.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Sasha is a man. It is oftentimes a nickname for Alexander. In this case, it's not. It's just a name he liked. Something they called him that as a child. And when he came to America, and that theme is in all my novels. You come to America, you can remake yourself.
Yes.
You change your name. You change what you were doing. You become complete. That's the dream about coming to America. Unlimited opportunities. Now that doesn't always happen for every immigrant, but for these immigrants who were well educated in the country where they came from, they come to the United States. It should seem similar, but it isn't. But at the same time, you figure this is truly the land of opportunity, and I think a lot of people feel that way. Particularly if they come from a place where it isn't like they didn't have anything. We're not talking about really real poverty, which these people were faced with. It's just a lack of opportunity. There was too much structure in America. Maybe people could argue there's no structure.
Right.
So, and that's what the part of the attraction, I think, of America is that there is this sense. Particularly for people who come here, two kinds of people come, like immigrants, who really find success here. One is people who are educated, but maybe educated abroad, don't speak English, but actually find their way. And the other one is people that do leave poverty, do leave unsettling places like Central America and other parts of Latin America and the Caribbean, and they come to the United States, and many of them illegal and stay illegal, but they are ambitious. And they see, because we don't have a lot of structure, you can open up and become a landscaper.
Yes.
You can become a painter. I mean, as long as you don't need a license from some kind of government agency, you can go on and have a business. And you have all your kids working, and your wife, and your sister-in-law, and your brother-in-law. And that's how business gets generated. And I would say the cities in the United States that have done the best over the last couple of 100 years are those that have lots and lots of immigrants.
Bringing in a different work ethic that exists in their home country, which very often doesn't exist in ours. So, yeah.
And that's just, New York is gotten prosperous. It continues constantly to be fed by more and more immigrants. And they just come from strange places. Their color of skin is different. They speak a different language. But they come here with drive and ambition because they believe this to be the place of opportunity. And it is for a lot of people. It is for a lot. Many Americans have gotten complacent. And so you want a job and you want to go there, and you want to work at a steady level. You don't want to go high. You don't want to go low, but it's steady level. These people don't come with those expectations. They have nothing, and they're going to become successful. So, in fact, my niece married a Russian kid, and they came here with 2 suitcases and nothing, and got rich in America. Oh, and that's
wonderful success story.
Exactly, and they're duplicated by many. Now they came well educated,
right,
but not by the educational standards supposedly that the Americans wanted. But they were willing to try the beginning. And they just stayed to it. And then they became entrepreneurial. So they got rich because they invested in real estate.
All right.
And that's a thing that many immigrants do. Or they invest in a business. So you become a landscaper, and you go from just your family to bigger and bigger. Yep. And all of a sudden you're a landscaper for the entire community. Yeah. And those kinds of people. Yes, exactly.
Right. Well, we're down to just a minute.
Oh, well, it's been wonderful to be here.
I want to thank you for being here, and I really, really, really encourage everyone. Again, tell us where you find your books.
The Terrorists would be on www.oceanbreezepress.net.
There you go, right there on the screen.
And on Amazon, of course. And at the Savoy Bookshop and Cafe in downtown Westerly.
Great. Well, Harriet, again, thank you so much for sharing yourself and your wonderful works of art, as I would call them. It's always a delight to see you. And you're one of my favorite people. You're just a doll. So
thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you. I want to thank my viewers for tuning in today with Around the Town with Mark. We always love to have you. And certainly come back and see us again real soon. We'll have another great show coming up for you before you know it. Have a great day.